Hello, listeners of the circuit. I am Ben Bajarin.
I'm Jay Goldberg. Greetings, programs.
So this was an interesting week, Jay. We have a new entrant to the mixed reality world in Apple. This was the week of WWDC, and they announced the Apple Vision Pro, and to a cheering crowd and a lot of fanfare from those who have used it. I'm curious your thoughts.
So I didn't go to the event. I watched the keynote a couple times, and last night I published a post on it, mostly just sort of organize my thoughts because I knew we were going to talk about this today. And the weirdest thing happened this morning. I woke up to a whole bunch of comments and tweets, DMs, emails, text messages from people who had been to the event, seen my post, and said, "Hey Jay, I hear you have a few questions about it. Here are some answers to your questions. Feel free to call me, and I'll tell you more about it." And I was like, what is going on here? Because most of the people who reached out to me were like serious journalists. These are not people who are going to be carrying the Apple marketing department's water, right? And I was like, why are they doing this? And it occurred to me, I think a lot of people just felt that this device was so magical, like they've been enchanted. That's the only way I can explain it. They're like, everybody's been converted. They think it's something really special here, and I buy that. Like I just looking at it, and from the keynote, it was just clear like they've been thinking about this really hard for a long time. They seem to have just gone into every corner case, every use case. They've really put a lot of thought into how this should work. And this is Apple's secret sauce, right? This is their corest competencies. They understand human interface better than any company in the world, and it was on full display here. So on technically, it's a marvel, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to believe that the interface, the user interface, is as magical as people seem to think it is. I'm less clear what exactly we're all going to do with it,
Yeah.
right? On a long term basis, because I get that it's a cool device, but I remember like the Apple Watch. When the Apple Watch came out, everyone was really excited about it, and
Yep.
hey, this is great. And then the enthusiasm kind of tapered off once it got onto everybody's wrists, and people realized they didn't like wearing watches anymore. This is obviously different. They put a lot more effort into this. It's much more expensive, but I'm just curious. Like, Apple's stated intent here is to introduce a new compute platform. You have your
Yeah.
phone, you have your laptop, and now you have this. Okay, that makes sense. But what am I going to do with it exactly? And I don't think it's Apple's fault. I don't think they've done anything wrong here. I think they've done everything right. I just think it's a new way to think about compute, and we as humans haven't fully explored that.
Agree. So I'll give you a couple things from my perspective that I think is, and this is a longer time to talk about this, which I like for this forum because I did do some very brief videos. My colleague Carolina and I, Milena and I did some very quick videos of our
You were at the
hands-on.
event. You were at the
Yeah,
event, right?
yeah, correct. Yeah, I was there, which to be honest with you, and I recorded this and tweeted some of it out. What was missed on the keynote when I watched it afterwards, for those who were not there, was the crowd's reaction to so many different elements of the headset announcement. So I recorded, when I had a sense it was coming because Tim's like, one more thing. I was like, let's record this. People were just super excited, but the oohs and the ahs with some of those very specific technology innovations. And I tweeted as it was going, just looking through the specs that was happening when they talked about the display drivers, all of the sensors, kind of everything that was going on to the experience. I was like, you know what, as a tech enthusiast, as I am, partial to, in this case, just technology, not because it's Apple or anything else, but just a tech geek and enthusiast, it's one of the most amazing pieces of technology I've ever seen at a technological level. And I think at a fundamental point, that's an interesting starting point, right? To just say, let's create something, and then I'll talk about the experience because I do think that's. But let's just again, from a technology standpoint, let's create something that, like you said, and I think this is exactly the right word. Word is a technological marvel, and then wrap some software around it and then let developers go and create these experiences is a good starting point, because that's not the case of competing products. They're good, they play some games, but they're not the best pieces of technology you've ever seen, and then start to do. So I was just intrigued with that. Again, as a tech enthusiast and a geek, I was geeking out over the technology. Let's just at a high level.
Yeah, I share that sentiment. Even just watching the keynote, I was like, every 30 seconds there was some crazy thing like audio ray tracing. What? I mean, right? That crazy. And then all this foveation rendering, like that's a huge problem.
Yep.
And like they have a whole chip for it. I mean, we'll get into it, but like
Yep.
every minute was like every beat there was like, oh, and then we have this other totally new technology we've completely invented. Like they've created
Yep.
digital avatars, like the whole
Yep.
FaceTime thing.
Yep.
I mean, just amazing.
The other part that stood out to me too, as I just reflected on this afterwards, because this was a big sort of comment about the outward facing display. And and I thought about that because Apple didn't need to do that. And I'm going to qualify that in a second, but Apple didn't need to put a high resolution display on the outside that shows a person your eyes. But Apple did have to put that display because it met the experience that they wanted to reveal, because one of their big complaints with VR, and this is like how Apple does things, right? They look at those products, they look at what's out there, and they go, there's some shades of what's interesting, but I feel like this is a problem. And for them, it was that you're disconnected from your environment. People don't see you, so they have no idea what you're looking at. And in an enterprise world, that actually matters, right? Can I walk up to you and just say, hey, Jay, I had an idea about something, maybe we could talk, right? Knowing what you're doing helps the context. And there was a lot of enterprise use cases for good reason, which we'll talk about. But like I said, it just blew me away because they could have made this product far less cheaper with this interface, and it would have still been amazing. But instead, they're like, well, we want to solve this problem day one with this display, which is super cool. I mean, I get it. Some people are like, oh, it's creepy. And I was like, but it's needed. That's why I just kept walking around. Like, Apple needed to do it because that's Apple.
Yep. Yeah, I one of my kids has an Oculus. He likes to play it, and it creeps me out when he's standing in a room and he's looking at me, but I can't see his eyes. You just see the white goggles. Like that's. I'm not sure the eyes will be better, but it can't be worse, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think you made a good point. Is they threw everything in, and I can't fault them for the price tag, right? It's $3,500. I'm not going to buy one.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money, but why not? Let's start here. I mean, there it is, right in the name. It's the Pro version of this. We're going to start with the Pro version. And then I'm sure in a year or two we'll have an Air version or whatever they're going to call it. That's expensive but conceivably affordable.
Right.
And then but there's so much work that has to go into all of this. Like all those technologies took a lot of work. Let's just put everything in at a high price point.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll talk about this. I'm sure they can't make that many of them. So let's just charge a high price because we can't make that many to sell. So let's just let's start off at the expensive version, and then we'll work everything cost everything down. And I kept thinking during the event, I kept looking around to find my old original iPhone, right, the 2007 version, and just thinking about comparing that to the iPhone 14 I have now. It's like the new one is so much better than that original one, and the original one was magical at the time. Mm-hmm. And then sort of extrapolate that for where this could go with the goggles. What's Vision Air 12 going to look like? It's pretty intimidating.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to the hardware as we will, but I want to talk about the experience first. So I was lucky enough to demo it, and I'll say a few things. I've used every headset on the market. And I was really concerned after this demo. I was like, I've used pretty much every popular device out there and many that are unreleased that companies and labs show me. And I was like, it's better by a landslide. And I was like, but is that just me? Like, what are other people going to say who have tried these? Like Marquez. And I was like, I said it. I went out on a limb and I was like, it is by far the best experience I have ever seen in terms of visual fidelity, latency. And so I did this thing where with a lot of VR headsets, I always try like, okay, what's my reaction? Like, what's the latency? Because, you're walking around a room and you try to handle an object. So I actually took my phone and I threw it up in the air and I caught it. And I can't do that with other devices, right? It might hit your hand, but I was like, you know what? Somebody could throw me a ball from across the room and I could catch it with this thing. Like, that's how good the latency was, which is due to a piece of silicon, which we'll get to on the hardware. But just to talk about them understanding latency is a reason why as you move around a room you get a little dizzy or nausea, or people who have that problem. I think the stated metric is 12 milliseconds or less. I've heard most people say you got to be under 10. And Apple's doing it probably in half that, in 5 to 6 milliseconds, maybe better depending on speed, which is insane. But the thing so the pass-through was the big thing that stood to me. The other one was the eye tracking, because I could not believe how good the eye tracking was. And anybody who saw the visual they showed of all those sensors that are literally just there to track your eyes and do a retina scan to validate and log you in, because your retina is unique to others. So all of that, like in these crazy lenses, pulls off how good this eye tracking was, where it did not miss. I mean, you look at an icon and you use this pinch to touch or pinch to tap, whatever we're going to call this. I don't know, pinch to touch, pinch to tap. But you just do that, and you could do it anywhere. Like, you could be on your lap, you could do it out here, and it just worked every single time. Sometimes on very small objects, little tiny X's just worked, or pinching to pick up and move a window. Or I was like, I can't believe this works. But so the high fidelity, the user interface, 100%, just in terms of the eye tracking, that needs to be right. For them to build the ecosystem out, eye tracking and that interface needs to be there. But the most mind blowing thing to me was this eyesight thing, where when you're in full VR, and the way they did this demo was there's a thing they have called environments, and so they're digital environments, but the fidelity is so high it feels like you're there. So examples are, you're on a beach in Hawaii. The one they had me in was near a lake in Oregon with Mount Hood in the background. And so the way they start this demo is it pops up and they're like, these are environments. They're very serene. We think they're peaceful, and they were super peaceful. Like, this is the kind of thing you could do and for mental health and just calm down and relax. But it's a window at this point. It just pops up in a window. And then as you turn the crown, it sort of just immerses, like the room around you that you're seeing fades out, and then you're in a full immersed environment. And you sit there for like 20 seconds, and then the person who was giving the demo starts talking to you. And they start showing up out of nowhere into your scene, like a little silhouette. And then the more they start talking, the louder it gets, the brighter they get, and they're like fully there. And I was like, what? Like, how is that? So then I was thinking, so imagine this use case, right? Because they're exactly right. The problem they wanted to solve was context, right? You're in this environment, but let's not disconnect you from the world, because it does matter, right? People should still be able to interact with you. So imagine, like, what the thing I was thinking about was, you're on a plane, you're in this environment because you're a little freaked out by turbulence, like I am, so you're trying to stay calm, and the flight attendant starts talking to you. They come by, and so now all of a sudden that flight attendant would come into your space, and you'd be able to see them, and they'd obviously know that you're now looking at them. I just thought that was it was mind-blowing, because you've never experienced someone just show up out of nowhere in your virtual immersed world, and then be able to interact with that person. It was just you have to see it to explain. I was so taken aback by that. But that, again, that's the thoughtfulness that's gone into this experience. It's not just, look how cool it is that you're immersed in a reality. Let's not disconnect you from the world. And all of that technology goes into making that experience as impressive as it was.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, this is what Apple is really, really good at, is thinking through all the little intricacies of human interaction. I just have one question, though. Is there a way to turn that off, so that if you're on an airplane and somebody sitting next to you just is chatting you up, you can just block them out entirely? Or do they have to appear as they get louder?
No, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. I think they're assuming that you want to be interrupted. There might be a way that that you can't. I think again, right? The part that hits me about this demo is one. It's tough to scale this thing, like just in general, because they did have to custom fit and insert for my face. They did see whether or not you needed glasses or not, which I don't. The people who did have glasses had to go through this process of having lenses swapped out. So you actually got lenses for your prescription that you put in. Again, not a scalable experience at any level, mass level, but they did all these things to make sure you had the best experience possible. So there's, again, there's to your point about like, so the what are we going to do with these things? I mean, I actually personally enjoy with Oculus watching movies, on Netflix or whatever, on what feels like a big theater. The only difference is those aren't terribly high resolution. Like my 4K TV is better resolution. The theater demo or the video demo of this was so high resolution. I was like, I could see this. Like I could see myself sitting here watching a movie because it really is a giant screen, as big as I want to make it. Sitting now by a lake in Oregon, right? That's one of the environments you could sit and watch this movie. And it was really high fidelity. So like I could actually appreciated watching movies. So one of my theories is, well, what happens if this replaces TVs? The other element of that was now it makes a ton of sense to me, all these content deals Apple's doing for sports, because they had an example of a soccer match using MLS, which is a deal that Apple has, and the camera is in 3D sitting on the goalpost. So you're watching the action come at you and the goal, go in. And I was like, okay. I mean, I could, when it's high fidelity, like in other Oculuses, you're like, it's okay, but I see the pixels. Not seeing the pixels was such a key part about the visual experience that, again, they did with a Apple Silicon backed display, because they went out of their way to say that. It was their display driver, micro OLED. They went through the whole, how many pixels are seeing. It's basically 4K-ish, a little more than 4K in each eye. But it was all this technology that we're talking about is what went into making this experience as good as it is. And this is the point that I want to make, because I think it's the most important one. Outside of tech enthusiasts who will 100% love this product, but are also the market for VR today, people who, generally skew more techie. What Apple has, in my opinion, is the base level experience to even get a normal consumer to consider this. And if that's the base level experience, and it requires an M1, it requires a custom coprocessor, an R1, which is a sensor fusion chip, a however many dozens of displays that go into this, then the hardware world has a very long way to go before this is mainstream, because that to me is the base level experience, and it's going to take years to get that into an affordable product. But there's so much technology packed into just deliver the base level experience to get an average consumer to participate in this category.
I think that's a really good way of framing this. This is the base. This is the base. Like everyone else before, you haven't even anteed up yet. Like this is the ante. If you want to be in this market, this is the bare minimum that you have to have to really to do this right, to just be in this market. Yep. And Apple is now, I don't know how far ahead of everybody. Right, they're pretty far. I have friends at Meta who are working on Oculus. I worry about how they're feeling this week. I have a friend at another large internet company that's working on screens, and I texted him during the keynote, and I still haven't heard back. 2 days later, I think
they're all
shocked.
They're all at the whiteboards. Yeah, right. I have a couple friends on the hardware team at Meta too, and I was just like, I'm curious on your thoughts. Right. But the thing is, like I said, the interesting part about how all that technology wraps into this, again, base level experience, what we're talking to was, I think, I just need to go on the record for everybody, because, sometimes I just like to say when either I'm wrong or miscalculated. I've been the biggest skeptic of this forever, because I knew how far the technology was to actually being there. But I was genuinely surprised how mature the software ecosystem was. Like how much that experience was so robust and how well it worked. Like it just worked in all the ways it has to work. Like a good example of this is, I don't expect, my wife, she's a late adopter, to care about this thing at all. But I'm going to get one, and she'll want to try it, and it's going to work. in all the ways that she expects. And she'll be impressed, but she probably won't care to do anything with it yet. But she can use it. Like, she won't touch any other VR system. They're like, it's too hard to use. I don't like it. And so that's why I'm saying, like, it's good enough that anybody can try it and be like, that's really cool. Whether or not they care beyond that, but that's an impressive feat for me, that it's going to work. They're going to use their eye tracking. They're going to be able to do this pinch to zoom. It's going to be a whole new spatial interface, and it's actually going to work for anybody.
Okay, so I think we're agreed that the experience is there, that the technology is impressive. Let's talk a little bit more, though, about what people are going to do with this, because this is where I start to have a few problems. And I noticed this in the videos I was watching, the keynotes. My feelings were alternating between wow to ooh, that's kind of weird, that's kind of creepy. Like, they're just like some weird things. Like, and I think again, like I was saying at the start, is it's a new compute platform. We don't know what that means. Right? It's too soon to tell. Right? We don't have that much software yet. What are we going to use this for? Right? And you know, you said movies, which I get, but at the same time, like, I like to sit in my living room. I have a big TV and watch it with the family. Right? The idea of being behind goggles. I mean, it's bad enough when we're all sitting on the couch watching the same movie all on our phones. Right? That's a little uncomfortable. Now we're all going to be behind glasses and we can't really see each other exactly. I think that's a little, and I'm sure they're going to have a family viewing set up where you can all sit around and watch the movie and see, little avatars of each other.
Right.
But that's, there's reasons to resist that. Yeah. And then, so, okay, sitting on a plane, I would love this, but when else am I going to do this? Am I going to do work on it?
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah. Right.
Sitting at a desk and I have all these screens open. Yeah. Maybe I want to do that. Maybe it's if I'm at home, it makes sense, but in an office, it's a little. Right. There's going to be a whole new social language we're going to have to adopt if we're going to start using these in the office, and I'm not sure that society that's something we want or need or should have.
Yeah. So I'd frame it this way. So I published an article afterwards, and it basically was titled, Apple Vision Pro: Computing Without Borders. And as I thought about the opportunity that sits in front of us, because that's what it is. It's an opportunity, and we see where it goes. That the whole history of software development has been defined by screen size. The screen size of your computer, or of your lap, or your monitor, or your phone, or your tablet, or your TV. And so what happens when you're no longer constrained by a bezel? And that's essentially the point that Apple is trying to make. You have an infinite canvas in this space for your software. I could have far more windows open if I want. I could have far less and longer, and larger displays. I can move objects into 3D. And so there's elements where that's to me is the question. Okay, so, but that then comes back to the hardware, right? Because as we know, developers love innovative hardware. You got to put something out that captures their imagination and see where it goes. Because, and I've been adamant about this, if the software development community does not embrace this platform, it goes nowhere. They could sell a decent amount on a couple of interesting things. It goes nowhere, right? That's the bottom line. Software developers and this is a true point of Meta also, or anybody in this space, if they do not get a rich and vibrant software developer ecosystem, this product is just a glorified TV, maybe game console, like some of those easy things. And so that's the question at hand. What will developers do? How will software move forward? And is it a new paradigm? Maybe, but it's not up to Apple. But it is up to Apple to put the best technology out there, which is what they've done, capture developers' imagination, and see what happens. And that's the junction that we're at.
Yeah, I agree. And this is Apple. They've learned this lesson. It's burned into their DNA about building developer ecosystems, right? They learned that in the 80s, for goodness sake. And they haven't had a big misfire on software in a long time.
Wait. You mean, what do you mean software?
Sorry. In terms of you launch a new product, they've been pretty good about having tools ready fairly early on. Yeah, you know what? I take that back. They've had plenty of misfires, but
I would argue that there's no app ecosystem on Apple Watch.
They tried though. They tried.
Agreed.
They had
Agreed.
WatchKit,
Agreed.
and it just I think it just didn't take off, not because of poor developer tools, but just because the platform
Yes.
itself didn't
Yes.
lend itself, usage
I
didn't
agree.
lend itself to complicated ecosystem. This is
Agreed.
very different. I think they put a lot more effort into Vision OS and some of the tools around it from very early on. They're also launching all of those tools 6 months before the device is available. It's very on Apple, right? I think the Watch Kit came out at the same time or a little bit after the watch was introduced. Here we are launching this. They're announcing this product at least 6 months before it's available, and they're launching it at WWDC to get developers engaged. I haven't seen anyone review some of the tools. I think they're out in beta. Right, you can get a beta version of
Yes.
Vision OS. All that stuff is out, but I haven't seen anyone really dig into it yet. So I think that's what I'm going to be watching for: is what do developers see here? They have ARKit that's been out for a while, and it's been I've heard good things about it, but it's also something that no one's really used that much because there hasn't been a good
That's
platform
right.
for that.
That's right.
So we'll see how all of that plays out. I agree that's the key is getting developers engaged. But developers have. I think there's two waves of developer interest in this. The first is lots of people are going to try it out because it's new and cool, right? Developers tend to like to try out new technologies and new platforms, and that'll get a lot of interest early on. But then to really sustain that long term is they're going to have to be able to figure out a business model for it. And if you look at iPhone apps, that's kind of a bleak landscape, right? You have all these in-app purchase, free to download games driving a lot of stuff that's on the phone. It seems like this you're going to need to have more robust business models, and
Right. Right.
that's it's not a problem for today, but that's a curious one how we're gonna solve that, right? Because I think the risk there is it ends up just going to the big content owners, the movie studios, and
Right.
that's good, but it ends up in that camp where you're talking about, where it's just a good platform for watching movies,
Yep.
maybe.
Right. Or play some games. I mean, that's low
Or
hanging
play some
fruit.
games.
It was interesting. I'm curious your thoughts though on this because this was kind of the first time, and it makes sense, but that Apple really led with sort of a business use case. Like the software that was there was Teams, Zoom, WebEx, Office. Obviously, Adobe will be there. There was some 3D rendering. They're trying to say like, hey, there's a work context to this, and obviously it can pair with your Mac. It doesn't need your Mac, which to be honest with you was pretty wild because I have tried this on other things where, hey, plug it into your computer and bring up some displays, and it's okay. It's just again the low fidelity is what bothers me about pretty much every other headset trying to do this. But that you could just look at your Mac and then it will bring up, you know, the whatever you're working on. In this case, it was a video file. But that was pretty cool because again, if it's high fidelity, and I do use multiple monitors, you can see some of that being an interesting use case day one. Again, not enough to change things, but I was just surprised. I guess not surprised. It makes sense, but it's kind of the first time Apple's really kind of leaned into that enterprise or business or productivity use cases as day one because it feels kind of obvious for this platform.
Yeah. I mean, my whole time looking at this, talking about it, in the back of my head, I'm trying to figure out if I want to use Excel on these goggles or not.
That's exactly what I thought too, because we spent so much time in Excel. It's like,
Yeah.
how big do I want Excel? How many tabs and sheets
Yeah.
can I see at one time?
Yeah. How can I see 20 years of data, or 20
Yeah.
quarters of data all at once? Like
Yeah.
maybe I want that. I'm not sure. I mean, because on the other hand, I can buy 30 monitors instead of one
Yeah.
of these. So
Right. Right.
I'm not sure which is better, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we should also point out that on the gaming side, they announced Unity. You can have Unity tools from this on day one.
Yeah.
Huge deal for the gaming community.
Yeah.
Less important for enterprise, but still, I think that's an important. Like they thought about it. They're doing what they can, and now we got
Right.
6 months to see what people come up with.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's where I think, and you're totally right. Right. And to be clear, this demo was fairly curated. There was not a lot of free space for us to just go and do. And I talked to a bunch of other people to say like, how far did they let you go? Like, did they let you try kind of the voice stuff? And you couldn't go through the whole thing, which again makes it feel to me like very similar to the first iPhone launch, where you couldn't touch it, right? There was no demos. It was a I think they were pretty, if I recall the history of this, they were pretty freaked out that the first phone call wasn't going to go through, and then it went through. So it just shows you like it's on its way. It's got 6 to 9 months. I actually think this is going to be a spring launch, more like March, because Apple typically launches new categories in the spring. That's been their pattern. So that's 9 months away for the software to get better. But more importantly, I think our minds were blown now. I actually think our minds will be even more blown in 9 months for a device that people are going to have a very hard time getting their hands on.
Yeah. Yeah. You think about the original iPhone didn't even come with an app store, right? The app store, I think, came a year later. And I remember the original sort of development platform for the iPhone was very much duct tape and chewing gum.
Absolutely.
Right. This is eons away from that.
You basically had a good web browser in your pocket. Like that was the advantage over
That's right.
other things. And I made this point earlier. I was like, because people were saying, remember what it didn't have. And I was like, remember that it didn't have the ability to check corporate email in an era where BlackBerry was taking off. So
Right.
it's like,
That's right. Yeah. I it's sort of it's another problem though, because if you're a developer and you want to go after this, you are going to be constrained by the fact that it's going to be a very small market.
yes, very.
Right? I've seen all kinds of predictions about how big this is going to be, and even sort of a best case scenario is a few 100,000 users, which is not enough to really support a robust ecosystem.
Yeah. They're
So
that's why I think I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's a really good precedent for this, other than what they tried to say, which was kind of the original Mac. That moment when you moved from line item input in DOS and whatnot to a GUI, like that's the moment they tried to connect this to. Again, we're 30 years removed plus from that environment, right? Technology is much more mature, but that's the only comparable, I guess, which we talked about in several podcasts, you could even remotely make the paradigm for. But again, you're totally right. I would say over the next 2 years, if they had 1.5 million in sales, not because they couldn't sell that many. I think they could sell a crap ton at this price point to their enthusiast audience. It's just hard to make. It's hard to scale. It's hard to manufacture, and the supply chain is very challenged to scale this up day one. But let's just say it's 1.5 million in 2 years. Still not a giant market, so it has to be sowing the seeds of vision, hence the name, or what's possible to developers. That's just still the place I'm in that they just need to try it, be impressed with it, enamored, make apps, and then maybe in 3 or 4 years, when it's an affordable price point, it can start ramping because the ecosystem is behind it.
Ooh, that's a little bit of a chicken and egg then, right? It's a little bit of chicken and egg because you
It
need the
has to be.
software. You
Yeah.
need the software to get people to come on to buy the device, but software developers aren't going to want to make the software until there are enough people on the platform.
Agreed. And so I've used, we need a better term than chicken and egg though, to be honest with you, for tech. But I've used that exact phrase several times. It's extremely chicken and egg because, like I said, if honestly, Jay, maybe you think I'm crazy. If they could make 5 million of these things, I think they'd sell them. I think Apple's audience, including your wealthy in China, are more than happy to spend that on this product just to be to say they have it, but also because they're enthusiasts about technology. They can't make that many. For years, I don't think they can make that many, let alone, right, they need the economies of scale also to push in their favor, to go through the manufacturing ramps, to go through the additional pieces of silicon they'll need in efficiency for battery life. Because, again, this thing, and this was the point I wanted to make about silicon, the challenge for the rest of the industry is that I think they thought this would run an A series processor. Like Apple's entry would be an A series processor. So their roadmaps are more like a mobile SoC that's been converted and fully capable, but to a headset. Nobody expected this to be an M2 like level. And So if an M2 is the level that we need for this baseline experience you and I are talking about, everybody's a ways off from a mainstream solution that even has a chance, like many, many years. But the only game in town, in my opinion, is Qualcomm, and so this gives me a little bit more optimism that Qualcomm's return to custom silicon with the Orion platform, hence the Nuvia acquisition, could be something that they use to continue to increase their performance per watt, performance efficiencies, and then again help others compete with Apple. Because that's the question: who's going to help others compete with Apple? Right now, it's Qualcomm. It's certainly not Intel. It's not AMD. It's Qualcomm. But I think everybody's silicon roadmap changes now, seeing that this thing runs an M2.
So let me unpack that a little bit, because one, you mentioned that you thought they could sell 5 million units. To put that in context, 5 million units would be 20 billion in revenue ish, which is as big as the iPad, right? And is, I think, more revenue than all but 100 of the public companies in the U.S.
Correct.
Right? If they sell 5 million of those, it's still going to be called a failure, right?
Exactly.
Right, a year from now, we're going to see the headline.
Exactly.
They're going to sell. I think they're going to sell 200,000-300,000 in the first year, which is $1 billion in revenue, which is bigger than all but 500 companies in the U.S. in revenue. That's absolutely going to be labeled a failure, but in headlines a year from now, it's still spectacular success.
Yep.
All right, I just wanted to get that thought in there. Turning to silicon, I'm not sure I agree that Qualcomm is. I agree. This is good for Qualcomm, because you're right. They're the only part out there that can compete with this, or at least has it on the roadmap. The problem, though, is the software, and I think this is the mistake that Meta made. I think this is their critical flaw, was they abandoned their own operating system. Right? They abandoned their own operating system, and then once they did that, there was no need to do their own silicon, so they went to Qualcomm. And I think that was a mistake on their part. Not going to Qualcomm is the getting rid of their own OS. Right? We have now with we have Vision OS at Apple. I think that's going to be a huge differentiation, and someone else is going to have to do that. I think it's going to be, what else are you going to run the software on? All the intricacies of the user interface. There's a lot of complexity in how that works at the operating system level. Who's doing that work?
Well, I mean, yeah. So Meta's platform is theoretically built on Android, but it is a bit more of a. I would say it's its own skin, because I tweeted this, like, Meta's at a crossroads basically, and I think you might agree the latter is probably the scenario that happens, that they either need to go toe to toe with Apple on hardware and the ecosystem, right? So be more vertically integrated, or they need to let go of the hardware and just focus on the software platform and let, a Samsung, you name it, a company come in and provide the hardware. Basically, then they're going to be like Android and Windows of the mixed reality platform.
That's one example. It's one analogy, Android versus iOS. I'm going to say that's going to be tablet OS, iPad versus Android tablets, right? Which is 90% of the market is Apple and 10% is everybody else. Like, I think that's the risk here.
Agree. Yeah. The reality is you regardless, Jay, they're going to lose the high end to Apple. Like, I just don't care how. There's no scenario where they maintain premium in any scenario. So regardless, it's going to be a potentially, like you said, an 80-20 market. The whole, well, there's not a tablet market, there's an iPad market, or whatever, because Apple makes so much money in every category that they're in. The question is, can they monetize the platform more, I guess, like Windows does than perhaps Android, so that they are horizontal. But you're absolutely right. The consequence of that is you've given up the high end, which you're going to do anyway, and now you're just letting a much more diverse and sometimes less consistent hardware environment, but costs will come down, right? It'll be the middle to lower end of the market that they fill, and I mean, unless there's a pattern that plays out that's not like PCs, tablets, and phones, which we've seen, and there's something different. If it follows those patterns, Apple gets the high end. Somebody has to do all the rest with a platform, and that might be Meta.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that everyone else in this field is going back to planning day zero today, figuring out what to do next.
Right.
And I think the only viable solution is for somebody to create an alternative to Vision OS. And I think Meta could still do that. I think because I know that they hired a lot of people into the Oculus group.
It's huge.
And
It's
they
huge.
understand all these complex user issues and the foveation and the eye tracking and all that stuff. They have the ability to compete there, but they have to have a better control of the software. And I think it would be viable. I think that somebody could be a viable competitor to this, because it's going to take years to develop, even for Apple. So if somebody started today with all that expertise, I don't see why Meta couldn't go out and build, acquire / build an operating system team. It'd be expensive, and their shareholders would be upset. But I think if they really, really want to be in this business, I mean, it's the name of the company after all. If they want to be in this business, Meta, Facebook has to go out and restart their operating system. Otherwise, the best case scenario is they're the low value free alternative. That's the best case, right? Where they get 50% they get the volume but no money. The worst case is they just get nothing, and it's iPad. Right? Those are the choices. Like, they either have to have their own operating system, or best case is their PC to Mac and have no profit, or even worse, they get no volume, no profit, like the iPad. Those are the choices.
Yeah. I mean, again, though, every market Apple competes in, they absorb the most of the profits, even if they have the less of the share. So I don't see that changing. The question is who, to your point, and I agree with you, and at this point, I just don't see anybody else being able to do this other than Meta. Like, I don't think Google is going to be the platform that does this, and it's just all going to run an Android version. And Microsoft is focused on much other things than a version of Windows that would come to this. So I feel like it has to be Meta. But even in that scenario, right? There's Apple always takes premium. Like, that's just been the pattern, and I have a hard time believing that changes. So regardless, they're fighting for X price point and below with a business model that has to evolve. But that's the pattern. I'm just not sure how this changes anything.
It's not a law of physics, though, right? I mean, Apple is a company, and they have flaws, and this is all so new that we don't really understand how it's going to play out in the market and how users are going to adopt this and at what rate. So I think there's enough variables in the equation still that Meta could specifically change that if they had the will to do it. I think you're right. I don't think they will. I don't think they can stomach it. But it's certainly possible that someone could challenge this. Because I think there are real risks for everybody else. Because if this really becomes a new compute platform, there is a risk that Apple has 90% of it.
Agree.
Like the iPad, and I think that has to make everybody else uncomfortable.
I totally agree. And you hit it on the head. Like, I just feel like everybody knows who's competed with Apple how this has played out before, and for this to not be, and maybe I should just come up with Ben's law of Apple trajectory. Like, for this to not play out the same way, Apple has to screw it up. Because is Facebook going to take Apple's customers? Apple has a near lock on the most profitable and valuable consumers in all of the world. So you'd have to argue that they're going to leave and go to Meta with a headset that's better than anything Apple can do. And I have a hard time believing that plays out. In almost to the same degree I believe in laws of physics, Jay.
I'm not saying it's likely. I'm just saying
I know.
that's
I agree.
possible.
But I want there to be competition. That's the point. And I do think there's time. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think Qualcomm could say, hey, look, let's work with Meta. Let's flesh this out. Let's take Orion as an architecture, and let's do something like this that's that powerful. Like, this is a market that's going to take a long time to develop. I mean, Apple's not going to get the price of this down anytime soon. So I feel like everybody could try, has a shot, and I want there to be competition. it's going to require, a bunch of players versus Apple, who's just one player and controls this vertically. Like that's the root of this competitive challenge. But I want there to be competition, and I think there's time. People just need to start getting their ducks in a row right now to march out a 5-year roadmap that can compete with this product.
Okay, we're running out of time. Can we just touch on hardware real quick? We mentioned this is all powered by an M2, which is crazy, right? That's a laptop processor. I mean, that's just. I agree with what you said before. Everyone thought it was going to be an A series phone processor. No, it's a full blown laptop grade CPU. But then in addition to that, they have this R1 chip, right? Which they had some fancy name for it, like a signal processing chip, but it's really, like you called it, a sensor fusion.
Sensor fusion, yeah.
Right? 12 cameras, 6 microphones, 5 other sensors, something like that.
Yep.
It's interesting to me because I have this thesis that it only makes sense to develop your own chip when it conveys a strategic advantage. Right. With the iPhone, the A series, you tie the software and the hardware together, and the end result is people are locked into the ecosystem because it's just so much better performance.
Right.
The fact that for this they decided to make their own chip tells you where the really hard part is. It's around the latency and the foveation rendering and the eye tracking and keeping that latency to 5 milliseconds. That's a crazy number.
Yep.
And that's critical here, because if you get those latency numbers wrong, people get nauseous. Right? Yep. There were early demos of other platforms where people were throwing up because it was just like
absolutely
getting so dizzy. Right? That's the critical piece of all this. And nobody else makes one of those.
So on your point, which is exactly what you said, there's two parts to this. You hit it exactly on the head when you said that's where the problem was. That's where the bottleneck was that somebody else couldn't do for Apple. Absolutely. What that tells you, though, to the market is also that, like, hey, you're going to have something even remotely similar if you want to deal with this problem that's latency. So that's the latency point, the sensor fusion, all of that part. The other one was they went out of their way, because they repeated it several times, that the thing that drives those pixels in that micro OLED is a Apple Vision backed display. That was exactly their terms, and they said it several times. Apple Silicon backed display. So we knew they made a display driver. I think they've done something different, like a different one, a better one or whatever, that's handling the resolution in the micro OLED, which again tells you that was a bottleneck. That's something that they needed another chip for. And oh, by the way, everybody else, you're going to have something similar if you want this high of resolution in every eye.
So that's at least 3, possibly 4, 5 Apple Silicon chips in this.
Well, yeah, we know they do the DSP, so the camera, they did the 3D camera, so I'm sure that was their DSP. At least 5, and I also heard a bunch of sensors are custom.
Yeah, no, this is going to end up like the iPad. They're going to take 99% of this market.
Well, I was in that position, and then you were taking the other one, so now I'm trying to be optimistic about the others. We don't know how it plays out, Jay. Okay. But again, I just want to come back to this fundamental point that at the end of the day, in all these regards, it is, like you said, a technological marvel, and I just think that has to be appreciated. Maybe this whole thing goes nowhere. Maybe it's a paperweight for 5 years. Maybe. Fine. I doubt it, but we'll see. But from a technology standpoint, it's really freaking cool, and I love that part of it. That's, as a geek, it's a marvel of innovation. I said my piece.
Yeah, agreed. It is a technical marvel. We're agreed on that. It is the user interface is incredible. And now it's going to be the waiting game to see how people use this. And I think that's going to be interesting. It'll be fun to watch.
Yep, fun times. We've got AI, Jay. We've got mixed reality back. Can the industry handle 2 booms at one time? I don't know. It might be too much, but we will see. And luckily, there's lots of silicon involved, so we have so much to keep talking about on the circuit.
Cool.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. We always appreciate your comments and your reviews, and have a great weekend, day, wherever you are in the world, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening, everybody. Please tell your friends, click like, subscribe, send us out on your feeds. Thank you.